first iteration of the Q1 2015 CHI Rater Refresh Training. This is our second actual session for this particular testing and rating window. We'll be doing 2 more sessions tomorrow night at 8 and 9 Eastern. My name is Rich Overholt. I'm the Implementation Services Manager with McCann Associates. As most of you know, McCann is the technical partner of CCHI on the administration and scoring associated with both the core CHI and the CHI examination. Thing here, I just wanted to mention that in order to kind of keep the background noise down a little bit, we are going to be muting everybody's microphones throughout our session. We will devote some time at the end of this, as you can see from the agenda, for a question and answer period. However, if there is something that's important as we go through, we encourage you to use the GoToMeeting chat feature. Natalia and I will both keep an eye on that as we go through the session, and we'll attempt to answer any question that comes up as we go through the session as quickly as we possibly can. All right. Now, our agenda this evening should look quite familiar. It's a variation of the one that we've been doing for most of you for quite some time. We're going to spend just about 5 minutes or so here with our intro and overview to the session today. We're going to spend about 20 actual minutes on the Rater Refresh itself, which will also be guided by me. And when we get to the end of our session, we'll devote a few minutes to general question and answer, which will be co-led by Natalia and myself. And I'm sure Natalia will have some informative closing remarks for us as we call it a night. And getting right into things. Overview. In the CA examinations, all interpretation and site translation problems are scored. In this test, we utilize anchored rating scales with specific quality of response associated with each score point rated by each rater. Criterion ratings are randomly inserted during the rating process, and this is done to provide a standard measure of quality control across all the raters throughout the rating window. All responses are scored by 2 raters. If the 2 raters scoring each response differ by more than 1 point in their award of a score, the problem is automatically funneled to a 3rd rater, referred to as a chief, who makes the final score determination for the item. Item validity. Now we're going to discuss the validity of the items and the test itself. Back in 2010 or so, a job analysis was conducted, spurred by CCHI, which identified the critical knowledge, skills, and activities required for successful medical interpreters. This resulted in development of a test blueprint which details which specific skills are critical for successful performance, how the skills should be measured, and with how many test items. Each test item is explicitly linked to a KSA, or knowledge, skill, or activity, described in the job analysis report. And the test content developers completed that initial linkage, and CCHI-led subject matter experts verified the content developers' linkages. Item performance is continuously monitored by CCHI with technical assistance from McCann. It is critical to successful and accurate rating and scoring that item raters keep in mind at all times during the process what the target audience is for the CHI assessment. Keep in mind that the purpose of this examination is to distinguish minimum proficiency as a healthcare interpreter from lower levels, given the target audience, not to identify masterful interpreters. In this definition, the target audience is a person who is able to perform the functions of an entry-level healthcare interpreter competently and independently in a healthcare setting, with the knowledge, skill, and ability required to relay messages accurately from a source language to a target language in a culturally competent manner and in accordance with established ethical standards. Keep in mind also that entry level in this case means the level required to be able to begin to perform unsupervised healthcare interpreting competently Excuse my update there. Anchored rating scales. The CHI exam utilizes anchored rating scales. This is a hallmark. A hallmark of anchored scales is that each score point has associated with it a specific definition. And the task for raters then is to evaluate the item that they're rating in the context of the anchored rating scales, and then to assign a rating based upon their common interpretation of the definition provided on the scale itself for each level of performance. There are very specific and well-defined advantages to anchored rating scales. They are easy and intuitive to use. They do provide very specific feedback to candidates based on their performance, and they minimize the risk of rater subjectivity. The sort of scoring being conducted for the CHI exam is referred to as performance scoring, and this allows the testing of candidates on complex content requiring a detailed response. In the case of the CHI exam, the items require examinees to generate a response, which is then scored by raters. Now, there are known and well-defined issues with performance scoring. Such content can be very difficult to score. The process itself is inherently at a greater risk of subjectivity. And this actually is what necessitates the need for periodic rater trainings like we're having here. Performance scoring is far more costly due to the human expense of maintaining the scoring and the raters, and also requires human raters who both require ongoing training as well as ongoing monitoring. There are known risks to high-quality rating, and CCHI goes to great efforts and great pains to mitigate this risk. Good rating requires sound inter-rater reliability, and that is, raters must agree with the ratings of the same test taker's response to an item. To the extent that raters agree, we have good inter-rater reliability, and the use of anchored and the rater refresh meetings each cycle are meant to maintain that good rater agreement. In addition, McCann regularly tracks and reports on rater performance each cycle and each year, making sure in both cases that raters are performing consistently. There are known threats to quality rating, and raters should always keep these issues in mind as the scoring is conducted. One of these threats is the halo effect. This represents a situation where positive or negative performance on a part of a test can influence subsequent ratings. An example of this might be that a test taker does well on one particular vignette and is subsequently rated and viewed positively on other vignettes. Central tendency is a situation where we have the failure to differentiate across candidates, essentially assigning near equal ratings to all problems regardless of actual test taker performance. Contrast is a situation where test taker performance is judged not against the anchored scale, but rather against the performance of other candidates who were recently tested. And finally, the last risk is called drift. This is a situation that arises over time when a rater essentially applies different standards or interpretations of the anchored scale. Now, some things to consider as you rate and tendencies in 2015. Are you as a rater rating within the guidelines and the well-defined scoring definitions? And do the candidate's errors really represent a shift in meaning? Now, a good way to ensure that we have a good understanding of all this and that we are rating within guidelines and scoring definitions is a review of our scoring rubric. The rubric has not changed since the launch of the test back in early 2012. And we're going to go through here the usual 4 scoring domains and the 4 score points within each of the domains. Our first scoring domain is register. In terms of its use with this test, register is a variety of language used for a particular purpose or a particular social setting. Examples include prescribed grammar, formal versus informal tone or forms of address, technical terminology, and colloquial language. A score point of 0 in the register domain means that changes in the register render the meaning inaccurate. A score point of 1 means that changes in the register to shift the meaning of the message. Score point of 2 means that changes in register do not affect meaning. And score point of 3 means that register is maintained. Our second domain area is lexical content. Here, lexical content refers to units of information. These can be individual words or groups of words or phrases that communicate a single concept. Here, these errors can include omissions, additions, and the inaccurate translation of a unit of information. In lexical content, a score point of 0 means that errors render the meaning inaccurate. Score point of 1 means that errors in lexical content can shift the meaning of the message. Score point of 2 means that errors in lexical content do not affect the meaning. And finally, score point of 3 means that lexical content is maintained throughout. Our third scoring domain is grammar. In this particular use, grammar includes the set of rules governing how sentences, phrases, and words are put together in a given language. Examples of errors in grammar can include verb tense, number, gender, and word order or syntax. In the grammar domain, score point of 0 means that errors can render the meaning inaccurate. Score point of 1 means that grammatical errors can shift the meaning of the message. Score point of 2 means that grammar errors do not affect meaning. And finally, score point of 3 means that grammar is maintained. Our fourth and final domain is the quality of speech. In this context, quality of speech focuses on the physical characteristics of the speech produced. This includes false starts, repetitions, poor pronunciation, volume control, pace, and intonation. In the quality of speech domain, score point of 0 means that changes in quality of speech will render the meaning inaccurate. Score point of 1 means that changes in the quality of speech can shift the meaning of the message. Score point of 2 means that changes in quality of speech do not affect meaning. And finally, score point of 3 means that quality of speech is maintained. Now consider some general notes and tendencies about applying the scores to the items. During your scoring, keep in mind the following. Each score point, kind of regardless of the domain, has a specific meaning, and all ratings should be done with that meaning in mind. 0 always indicates there are changes or errors rendering the result inaccurate. Score point of 1 indicates there are changes or errors shifting the meaning. Point of 2 indicates there are changes or errors that don't shift the meaning, and a score point of 3 indicates there are no changes or errors. And always keep in mind that scoring is not a matter of counting errors, but rather of assessing the impact of the errors if they occur on the overall meaning. A couple of other items to keep in mind with scoring. If during your rating a candidate self-corrects, score the last utterance, regardless of whether it's right or wrong. Events of this nature should be considered as a false start when rating for the quality of speech domain. If you find it helpful to do so, score the lexical content domain first. And finally, please keep in mind that omissions should be scored against the lexical content domain. Omissions are lexical content errors. If the test taker fails to maintain the register of the speaker provider or the patient, treat it as an error and score it accordingly. Any regionalism used in the response is accepted as correct if the response is free from meaning and grammar errors. And there may be situations where data is missing, and raters need to distinguish between the sources of error, as this can shift the rating task accordingly. This is a very important point. If data is missing due to perceived technical reasons, do not penalize the candidate. If the responses for the rest of the problem are sufficient, score it. Now, this does not concern key issues related to scales, medical terms, terms of art, or colloquialisms. Mark utterances that are absent for technical reasons as inaudible, inappropriate. If you cannot score it, mark the problem as cannot be rated. That's check the box labeled cannot be rated. Now, on the other hand, if data is missing due to a reason, candidates may be penalized. If 50% of a recording or more is missing and the response cannot be rated, as mentioned before, check the box cannot be rated and provide a comment in the notes box. I cannot stress to you enough, folks, the comments are very important. We're going to mention that a few times between now and the end of the session. Natalia will impress that upon you as well. We're going to ask you to please make an extra effort this period, especially when providing a score point of 0 or 1 for a particular item. Now, as mentioned, if data are missing due to candidate reasons, candidates can be penalized. A couple of examples: the candidate's pace is too slow, there are too many self-corrections or false starts, and this results in the candidate not completing the message and running out of time. As mentioned, if 50% or more is missing and the response cannot be rated, mark the box cannot be rated with a check, and then provide a comment in the notes box to specify why. For example, too many self-corrections, ran out of time. Very, very important to provide that comment. Now for some overall additional reminders on the mechanics of the rating process. Please remember that each rater works individually, no collaborating with other raters. We've discussed already the nuances of the rating system and the importance for raters to agree. And mentioning about ratings. In terms of where we see the greatest variability in terms of ratings, we really need to be clear, folks, that overall, CCHI raters really demonstrate strong, consistent agreement across all the rating activities and domains. But if there is one area where there might be slightly more variability, it would probably be the domain of lexical content. Grammar, register, quality of speech, they're a little more consistent. You do see a little more variability in the lexical content domain. Rater performance. McCann and CCHI jointly review rater performance at the end of each testing window. As part of this process, we consider 3 separate pieces of information. Number 1, how well did each rater agree with his or her peers? Number 2, how often did individual raters require a judge compared to the rest of the group overall? And number 3, how variable were the ratings for one rater? And we'll make a point here. If you have not heard directly from CCHI regarding the quality of your rating performance, it means that your performance falls within the range of standards. And in that case, congratulations. Keep it up. You're doing a great job. More of the same. And I know I've mentioned it a couple of times already, but I really must stress your comments on candidate responses are very important. In a moment, Natalia can provide a little bit of context as to why, but let's just go through this. If you assign a score of 0 or a 1, we require that you provide a comment in addition to the score. And Chiefs, you have to provide a comment for all of your responses. You must comment if a candidate has poor skills of keeping the mean equivalence. You should comment if a candidate has poor command of grammar. And you should also comment if a candidate mostly does not maintain register and replaces colloquial expressions with neutral ones or vice versa. Natalia, do you want to add anything to this? Again, I think we really need to try to compel people to be a little more consistent with the comments.
Thank you, Rich. Yes, the reason for the comments is that we can provide feedback to candidates who fail the exam. And the more tests we administer, the more we encounter candidates who ask for this feedback. So it's very crucial that when you provide the comments, you're as specific as possible. We don't need a dissertation, but also generic comments like poor grammar don't really help. So when the candidate has poor grammar, it's much more helpful if you will provide, like, they interpreted the tense wrong, or they couldn't conjugate the verbs correctly, or if it's a lexical error, give the example specifically, didn't know the correct term for miscarriage. So because these specific examples we can share with the candidates, but we cannot give them a judgmental appraisal of their command of grammar or understanding of terminology. But specific examples are very valuable. Thank you, Rich.
Thank you. All right, so moving along. Objectivity in our scoring is extremely important, and that's because each of the languages that CCHI certifies is spoken in multiple locations, and this, of course, can result in many variants of the same language. Also, CCHI is recruiting raters from a broad spectrum of countries and in different regions within each country. Objectivity can also be ensured by having multiple raters rating each candidate, as many as 14. Folks, always remember that each CHI exam has 7 vignettes. If we have 2 separate raters for each one of them, you have the potential for up to 14 raters scoring an entire test. And the use of multiple well-trained raters ensures that a candidate's rating is free from many well-known rater effects as well as other threats to the objectivity. As a final measure, in cases where raters fail to agree, the judge or chief is used to determine that final rating. And collectively, all these measures ensure that ratings for these exams are as free from bias and representative as possible of the candidate's true level of performance. Now again, trying to maintain that very important objectivity. CCHI really wants each candidate to be rated by as many different raters as possible. So here's a couple of practical tips for ensuring that. Allocate your time evenly across the rating window. And what we mean by that is don't log in on the first day and do all your rating. You log in the first day, spend a few hours rating, you get through 50 vignettes, and then you never log in and rate again. It means likelihood is you'd have a very high chance of actually providing ratings for a very small number of candidates. Now, what will be better instead is to log in each day or every other day and just try to do a couple of vignettes on each one of those days. We also ask that you don't rate more than 2 to 3 responses for any one candidate, and we'll actually show you a mechanical tip for ensuring that that doesn't happen. If a candidate seems familiar, the odds are that that candidate is familiar. In that case, you should skip and return that item to the pool and move on to the next one. Now, we're using 2 to 3 as kind of a rule of thumb. This really does apply to the Spanish and Mandarin raters only. The pool of Arabic raters is a little bit smaller. So for Arabic raters, we ask that you rate no more than 4 to 5 items per candidate. Again, 2 to 3 for Spanish and Mandarin, 4 to 5 for Arabic. We also ask that you, as closely as possible, follow the instructions that we're going to give you in a moment regarding the initial workload about rating and when you can start to rate. Now for Spanish. As soon as we hang up the phone here at the end of this session, feel free to go into the scoring tool and begin to rate. Your login and password is the same as last window. The website address for access to the scoring tool is the same as last window. As soon as we hang up, feel free to go in there and start rating. We've got nearly 30 tests that have been administered so far in the testing window, so there's lots to rate. If you're a Spanish rater, you may rate up to 150 vignettes, at which point we ask that you stop and refrain from further rating until either Natalia or myself contacts you and says it's okay to resume rating. For Arabic and Mandarin raters, again, just like Spanish, feel free to start rating immediately, as soon as we hang up in the session today. You may rate up to 20 vignettes, at which point we ask you stop and refrain from further rating, wait for instructions for Natalia or myself, at which point we'll say it's okay to log back in and do 10 more or 20 more. And here's a tip for kind of being able to mechanically ID a candidate and keep an eye on the number of vignettes for one candidate that you're rating. When you are in the scoring tool and you're viewing a list of available vignettes, the column that refers to user ID or session ID represents the candidate. And you can see that in my example, the fact that we have the same number, 1071343, for all 4 rows, means that I have 4 responses, all for the same candidate. So the user ID, session ID number is the same, but the response ID number changes for each one. So we have 4 separate responses for one candidate. Again, if you're a Spanish or a Mandarin rater, you probably don't want to do more than 3. If you were an Arabic rater, you could go ahead and do all 4. Now, regarding ADA policies, we're going to hand back off to Natalia for just a moment, and she can address this topic. Natalia?
Thank you. This testing window, again, we do not have any candidates who require ADA accommodation scheduled, but just as a reminder, we do provide human readers for blind candidates. So if you hear during, scoring a vignette, somebody saying stop or next in English, don't penalize the candidates. Most likely these are instructions for the human reader. And also in the site translation section, such candidates may run out of time because they are doing it differently than the rest of the candidates via prepared simultaneous interpreting. And usually we will let you know that we have candidates like that, but not this testing window. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving along. If during your period rating you have any questions, please keep in mind the following. Always remember that CCHI is the owner of the policies. And you see a few examples of those policies. Questions of that nature should be addressed directly to Natalia or Malika. The CAN should be contacted only for customer support, issues with the scoring tool, questions relating to the mechanics of the scoring process itself. We're going to include in just a moment the contact so that you have the ability to get in touch with CCHI and the CAN itself. These contacts have been the same now. I guess this is the 4th straight testing window, or at least the 3rd straight, that they haven't changed. So it'll be the same ones that you're familiar with working with. If you have some type of a technical issue during the rating process, we have different means of contact depending on the time of day. During normal customer support hours, the McCann team is ready to help you. We ask to contact us that you either call the toll-free number that you see or email measuredsuccess@mccantesting.com. As you can see, the standard support hours are 7:30 to 11, Monday through Thursday, and 7:30 through 6 on Friday and Saturday. These are expanded support hours that are in place for the testing windows. Now, after support hours, we ask that you email myself and Beth Tobin. Our addresses are listed here. They're the same ones that you're used to working with. We do ask that any off-hours communications come with a copy to Natalia and Malika. Their addresses are listed here. We do ask that any messages of this sort come directly to the people listed here. And we ask that you don't email the entire group. There's no need to copy all the other raters. So to reiterate, folks, when may you start rating? For all languages, the lights are green. You may start rating now. As in the last, I think it's 4 or 5 testing windows, or maybe more, we run the rating parallel to the actual testing, so certainly feel free to get started. This testing window was started last week, and it actually runs through Wednesday, the 11th of February. For rating, we're going to give you just about 2 weeks beyond that. We ask that you conclude your rating by February 23rd. That's for regular raters. And if you're a chief, we'll ask that you wrap up all your chiefing by the 28th of February. As Natalia's mentioned previously, the candidates are very anxious to get their final scores. And the sooner we can get the rating and the chiefing done, the sooner we can do our post-window analysis and get the scores out to the candidates. Folks, at this point, this brings us to the end of the prepared materials, and we're going to go ahead and open up the floor for any general question and answer that anybody might have. Feel free to direct any questions to Natalia or myself. Yeah. All right, Natalia, I think we're getting pretty good at this. Doesn't appear that there are any questions. Folks, if
Well, I think someone.
Sorry.
I think someone is trying to say something, but I don't hear it very well. Vila, do you try to talk? Are you trying to talk?
I am trying to talk, but you know what? If it's not working out well, I just send an email, okay?
Okay. All right. Yes. The connection seems to be very bad. So send us an email. And Rich already pretty much gave all my comments. I'm wishing you a good rating season. Please be mindful of the time. We do want to be done within the time frame and have everything wrapped up by the 28th of February. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening, and Rich, thank you for doing this for us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Natalia, and have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye now.